If you watch my stuff regularly, and if you are watching this video on the day that it is released, you probably know that yesterday I put up a video about Superman. So for this video, just as a change of pace, I'd like to talk about Superman, but a different Superman, not a Superman from the comic books, a Superman from TV, specifically the Superman from Superman and Lois, the CW live-action TV series that is winding down its fourth and final season. They have aired 7 episodes out of eventually a 10-episode last season of Superman and Lois, and when the entire series is over, and I can look back on it as a finished work, I'm almost certainly going to be doing a video about Superman and Lois as a series. But for now, I just want to talk about one particular episode. And as I sit here doing this, it's the most recent episode, episode 7 of season 4, titled A Regular Guy. I have been a fan of Superman and Lois for as long as the show has been on. In fact, for even longer than it has been its own show, because these particular versions of the characters, Superman as played by Tyler Hoechlin and Lois Lane as played by Elizabeth Tulloch, they were originally introduced as recurring characters on Supergirl, and they appeared in some of the big CW DC Comics show crossovers like Crisis on Infinite Earths and that kind of thing. So before they had their own show, they were popping up as featured players in that, and I loved Tyler Hoechlin's Superman from the moment I saw him in his first appearance on Supergirl, and I loved Elizabeth Tulloch's Lois Lane. They are both so good as those characters. So, of course, I was ready and eager to watch them on their own show when they got their own series. And I've been a fan of it all the way through. It's had some creative ups and downs. It hasn't always been fantastic, but it has remained a very compelling, very likable, and overall just very strong take on the characters. And it starts with an interesting spin on Superman and Lois. In this version, in this show, Superman and Lois, Clark Kent and Lois, are married and they have kids. They have twin teenage boys who are just entering their high school years as the show begins. They're twin boys, not identical twins, but there's Jordan and Jonathan. And Jordan develops superpowers very, very early in the series. In fact, in I think the first episode of the series, Jordan manifests superpowers for the first time. And it's about Superman and Lois as parents to 2 teenage boys, one of whom has superpowers for the entire show. And it's viewed through that lens, and they move from Metropolis back to Smallville, and they take up residence in the old Kent farm, and it's a unique spin on the classic sort of conventional Superman story. And like I said, some creative ups and downs. It hasn't always been fantastic, but it's been solid at least all the way through. And this final season has introduced us to, and by the way, spoilers for those of you who haven't watched the show, and specifically if you haven't watched this 4th and final season. Nothing I'm going to talk about is like a major shocking plot twist, but I'm going to talk about stuff that happens in the show. So if you haven't watched it, and if you're planning to watch it and you want to go in completely clean, maybe don't watch this video right now. But in the 4th season, we're introduced to him at the end of the 3rd season, but we really actually get to spend time with this show's version of Lex Luthor. We see this show's version of Doomsday, who is a sort of evolved form of this show's version of Bizarro. That's how they get to Doomsday in this version. He's kind of like a steroided up version of Bizarro. I'm not crazy about that, but it works all right for the show. And at the beginning of season 4, Superman dies. Doomsday kills him. They do their version of like a very abbreviated version of like the death of Superman from the comics. Doomsday kills him. Superman is dead, but within a few episodes, he comes back. And given that it's at the beginning of the final season of a series titled Superman and Lois, not a huge shock that Superman comes back to life before too long. But what happens is, after Superman dies, and he's killed very publicly in Smallville in front of Lois and the boys, and after that happens, and after the townspeople of Smallville who witness this horrific event see how Lois and Jordan and Jonathan react to the death of Superman, they start to suspect that maybe this family was a little closer to Superman than they thought. And then when Clark Kent isn't around, when Superman also isn't around, and then suddenly Superman is back, and also all of a sudden Clark Kent is back too, like people in Smallville finally start to put this together. And as this episode that I want to talk to you about, episode 7, begins, Clark has realized that people in Smallville are starting to catch on that he is really Superman. So he begins the episode determined to convince everyone who thinks he's Superman that he's actually not Superman. That's where the episode begins. And what makes it such a great episode is that it actually engages with this fundamental contradiction in the character of Superman. And that contradiction is a byproduct of his secret identity. Superman spends most of his life lying to most of the people he encounters about who he really is, especially the people he knows as Clark Kent. Like when he's Superman, he usually doesn't spend too much time with people because he's always going off to do more Superman stuff. But as Clark Kent, he has an actual life. He has a job. In this show, he has a wife. He has kids. He has friends. He has a fully integrated civilian existence. He's like a real person. And most of them don't know that he's Superman. Over the course of the show, more people find out, but it's still way more people don't know than know. So here's this character who stands for honesty and integrity, who stands for always doing the right thing, who stands for truth and justice, at least, if not always the American way, because usually the American way doesn't stand up to Superman's standard. And yet this character is a serial liar. And this episode acknowledges that and turns it into what I think is the best Superman story I have seen anywhere in years. Comics, movies, TV, live action, animated, whatever. It's fantastic. There are 3 great scenes in the episode. Alfred Hitchcock once said the formula for a good movie is 3 great scenes, no bad ones. And this episode of Superman and Lois easily meets that criteria. The first great scene is when Clark and his boys, Jonathan and Jordan, and by the way, by this point in the show, Jonathan has also manifested superpowers, so they're the Superboys. They both have superpowers. And Clark and Jonathan and Jordan have gone to the home of one of their classmates who has begun to suspect that Clark is Superman and that they, Jordan and Jonathan, also have superpowers, and that their superpowers have given them an unfair advantage playing in sports, and that's why this kid didn't make the football team last year because Jonathan had superpowers, and that's why he made the team and this kid didn't. And so Clark talks to the other kid's mom with Jonathan and Jordan, and they assure her it's all a misunderstanding. It's all just the foolish, misguided imagination of a child. Hey, I'm not mad, no harm done, but just so we're all on the same page, I'm not Superman, right? And the kid comes in, and his mom basically, blames him. And it's especially hurtful because this kid, he's been a troubled kid before. He's been in trouble. He's done drugs. He's had disciplinary problems. So his mom is already kind of primed to blame him and to suspect him of being the one in the wrong. But this time he's not. This time he's absolutely right. Clark Kent is Superman. And his sons do have superpowers. And the 3 of them are sitting there in this woman's house while she browbeats her son for being a liar and for, doing things that could harm the reputation of Clark Kent and his family and put them in danger for no reason. And he's just making up these lies and saying them about people. And Clark and the boys have to sit there knowing that this is their fault, knowing that this kid is being wrongly blamed for something by his mom, and that he was right, and he has to take this from his mom because they want to keep their secret. It's a really good scene. It's a really good scene, and it's played just perfectly. You can see how uncomfortable it makes, especially Clark, but the boys also, because the boys aren't as used to this secret identity stuff, but Clark has been doing this his whole life. But he feels guilty about it. He feels bad about it, but he goes through with it. That's the first great scene. The second great scene takes place in the town diner, right? Like the Smallville version of Luke's diner from Gilmore Girls, right? This is that place, the place where everybody in town goes to hang out and have breakfast and have lunch and dinner. And Lois and Clark are there with two of their friends who are important supporting characters in the show, but I don't need to get into that for the purposes of this video. And as they're sitting there having dinner and having a really important talk with their friends, this guy comes in, and this guy is the dirtbag criminal father of Jonathan's girlfriend. And we've seen him in the show before, like in a previous season. And now he's come back, and he has heard it through the grapevine that Clark Kent is really Superman. And he has come to expose Clark Kent to the rest of the town because he's tired of Clark Kent acting like he's better than him and running him out of town and telling him that he's no good when Clark Kent's nothing but a liar. He's been telling everybody in this town that he's somebody he's not. And now this guy, this dirtbag crook, he has shown up to reveal Clark Kent to everybody. He's an alien. He's a liar. He's not who you think he is. And Clark tries to defuse the situation as Clark, stands up, says, hey, come on, let's not do this here. Let's go outside. Let's talk this over. I'm sure we can clear this up if we just act like adults about this. Like he's trying to clear it up without going all Superman on the guy. The guy pulls a gun and he points it at Clark in front of this diner full of people. And this is Smallville. These people have known Clark Kent his entire life. And they've known Lois for a long time, too, because at this point in the show, Clark and Lois have been married for like 20 years. Like, we're deep into this Superman thing in this show. So everybody knows him. And this guy's pointing a gun at Clark. And Clark, again, tries to talk him down, but it doesn't work. And eventually the guy pulls the trigger. He fires the gun. And then we go into super slow-mo. Where we go into flash time. Or bullet time, if you prefer a more contemporary reference that is still like 25 years old. But anyway, we're in super slow-mo. And the bullet is flying toward Clark. Clark's just looking at it, trying to decide what to do. There are probably multiple scenarios going through his head of how he could handle this in a way that would still somehow preserve his secret identity. But eventually, he looks at the bullet. He looks down at Lois, who's sitting there. He looks around at the people in the diner who are looking on. He takes off his glasses, puts them down on the table, pulls open his shirt. There's the Superman suit underneath. And we get a close-up of the bullet hitting the S and crumpling and falling harmlessly to the ground. And when it hits the ground, we see that it is falling right at Clark's feet, and he has already changed out of his civilian clothes. And when it hits the ground at his feet, he's wearing his red Superman boots. And then we cut to a wide shot, and we're back in regular time again. Everything's moving normally. And there he stands, revealed to the diner as Superman, full costume. And the guy who fired the shot is like, oh my God, I knew it, you are Superman. And Kyle, Lois and Clark's friend, who is there at dinner with him, he gets up and he's like, I'll take care of this. And he ushers this dirtbag out and takes his gun away, and he's away from the scene. And then we just hold on the silence, the stunned silence of everybody else in that diner, looking at Superman, who they now know all this time has really been Clark Kent, the guy that they've known forever. And Superman just says to all of them in this very quiet, apologetic tone, I'm sorry that I've been lying to you all for so long. And then there's the third great scene. And the third great scene, well, there are some, let me get to some of the other lesser scenes, but still fantastic scenes before we get to the third scene so you can understand what it means. So there, after the diner, there's a family meeting back at the old Kent place, where Clark and the boys and Lois mutually agree that Clark will reveal his secret, not just to those people in the diner, but to the entire world. He's just going to come out as Superman to everybody, because at this point, they've decided that the secret identity, which was created in order to protect them so they could still have a normal private life, has become more of a liability than an asset. And They've mutually decided amongst them that they're better off, all of them, if they just reveal everything to the world. Then they don't have to hide. They don't have to keep secrets. So Lois calls some old friends at the Daily Planet, and the Daily Planet shows up, and they do a televised interview with Clark at his kitchen table, where he says, yeah, I'm Superman. And he's being interviewed by Janet Olsen, who is Jimmy Olsen's sister. And they have a nice, few-minute scene where we see the interview, the sit-down interview with Clark Kent, introducing himself to the world as Superman. And that's a really, really good scene. That's a really good scene. And that would almost be my third great scene in the episode, if not for this other scene. Throughout the episode, as everything that I've been telling you about has been happening, we've also seen a B-plot in the form of a series of flashbacks to a while back in the lives of these characters when Clark and Lois still worked for the Daily Planet. And Clark is sort of trying to navigate a friendship with Jimmy Olsen while also keeping his identity a secret from Jimmy and having to go off and do Superman stuff. And what this B-plot shows us is that because he has to constantly run off and be Superman, if you are Clark's friend and you don't know he's Superman, Clark Kent is a really lousy friend. He's completely unreliable. He always misses things and has an excuse for why he missed. He joins the softball team at Lois's encouragement, because she says, you should join, you should do things, you should have friends, you shouldn't be so isolated all the time. So, and at this point, Lois knows that he's Superman. And so he joins the softball team, and Jimmy's like all excited about it. And then Clark, he plays in one game and does really well. He bunts, so he doesn't use his superpowers to like smack a home run to the moon. He feels sensitive about that. He doesn't want to use his superpowers to cheat and give his team an unfair advantage. So when he comes up to bat, he bunts, right? And he has a good time, but he misses a bunch of other games because he has to go off and do Superman stuff. And eventually Jimmy notices that whenever Clark misses a game, it just so happens to coincide with Superman making a save somewhere. And Jimmy gets suspicious, and Jimmy confronts Clark with this, and he says, I think I figured it out. You're Superman. And Clark lies to Jimmy's face and says, Jimmy, I'm not Superman. Come on, don't be silly. Me, Superman? I'm not Superman. He lies to Jimmy's face. That's not the great scene. The great scene is Clark wanting to protect his secret identity from Jimmy's suspicions, misses the championship softball game on purpose. He could have been there. He could have played. He actually didn't have a Superman thing come up, right? There was no emergency. He could have gone and played softball with the rest of the team and helped them win the game. But he didn't. And they won the game. They won the game without him. And he comes into the office having missed the softball game, and Jimmy says, well, I guess you're not Superman. You missed the game, and Superman wasn't doing anything, so I guess it's just that you really didn't want to play softball with us that bad after all. And Clark tries to soften it and tries to say, no, Jimmy, it's not that. But Jimmy is, you can tell he's kind of hurt by it. And he says, hey, listen, it's okay. Nobody said we had to be pals. And Jimmy walks away and leaves Clark standing there. And it really, really comes home to you as you're watching that episode, as you're watching that scene, how much having a secret identity has cost him. Because, yeah, there are advantages to the secret identity. Yeah, it's allowed him to keep his family safe from any supervillains that may want to harm him or use his family and his friends as leverage against him. It's accomplished that, but it's also kept him from getting close to anybody who didn't know the secret. And he gets close to Lois, but Lois finds out pretty early on in their relationship in this version of the story. So he has Lois, and he has his parents, but his parents both eventually die. And he has his sons, but up until the first season of the show, his sons didn't even know he was Superman. He couldn't even tell his kids that he was really Superman. And then when they find out, it becomes their secret. So this has been weighing on him like a burden for years. And you see the toll that it takes. You see how much it hurts him to have to lie to people. There's a final scene, and it's not one of my 3 great scenes in the episode either, but it's still a really good scene. Like, there are no bad scenes in the episode. The episode is solid all the way through. But it's the first time that Clark goes back to that diner after having revealed himself to everybody. And he's a little nervous because he's not sure how people are going to react to him now that they know he is Superman. And he walks in, and he's just dressed in his normal Clark clothes. He's not in the costume or anything. And he walks in, and people look at him, and there's like a kind of a tense moment. And then there's a girl, a classmate of Jonathan and Jordan, who's up at the desk paying for some takeout. And she turns around, and she sees him, and she says, "Hi, Mr. Kent." And then goes about her business. And that kind of reassures him, And then he meets Jimmy Olsen. Jimmy Olsen has come into town, having heard the news. And he gets to catch up with Jimmy Olsen and actually be honest and open with Jimmy Olsen. And it's like, oh, maybe they'll finally get to be pals from now on. And it's a nice sort of heartwarming ending. I really love when a series like this can derive story from part of its basic premise. And that's what this episode does. It takes something that has been central to every variation of Superman ever told since he premiered in the comics in 1938. The idea that he has a secret identity. He is Clark Kent and he is Superman, and most people don't know that they're the same person. It takes that concept and acknowledges the inherent contradiction of that with Superman's mostly very noble, very admirable character, and it derives a story from it, and it deals with it. It acknowledges that tension, and it deals with it in a creative and compelling way. And I'm not saying that from now on, I think every Superman story should get rid of the secret identity and should do the same thing where Clark comes out as Superman to the entire world, and there's no more secret identity. I'm not saying that. I don't want that to happen. I like the secret identity. I like the fact that Clark is pretending to be Superman or Superman is pretending to be Clark, however you want to interpret it. I think that's an essential part of the character, but I also think that it creates that contradiction. And I think that a smart version of Superman, that especially if it's a series, whether it's a TV series or a series of movies or comic books or whatever, if you tell stories with that character long enough, I think eventually you should get around to dealing with that contradiction somehow. You don't have to deal with it in the same way that Superman and Lois has dealt with it, but I think you should deal with it somehow, and you should find some way to get story out of it and to acknowledge it. And Superman and Lois did that, and they did it in a really, really compelling and really beautiful way, in a way that actually challenges the character and then reaffirms him. It challenges his goodness, at least to a point, because if he's really a good, honest, upstanding, truthful guy, how could he have done this? But then through resolving it, it reaffirms all of those things about him. It shows you that, no, he is a good man. He is honest. He is truthful. When the chips are down, he will do the right thing for other people as well as for himself. And it's so well done. And what I really love about it, what really makes me happy to have watched it as a fan of Superman and as a fan of this particular show, is that even though I have really, really liked Superman and Lois from the beginning, one of the drawbacks to the show, one of the, I don't want to say failures of the show, but one of the weaknesses, let's say, of the show is that it, as good as it was, and as much as it excelled at creating memorable moments, it never really had a blow-away great episode. It's hard to think of a single episode of Superman and Lois from the first 3 seasons where, as a single episode, just judged on its own merit, you thought, man, that was a great episode. There were good episodes. There were episodes that were better than others. And like I said, there were lots of great moments you could think of. And overall, the general take on the characters is great. But there wasn't that great episode that stands head and shoulders above the rest and shows you what this series is at its very highest level. There was never any of those. There wasn't a single one of those until this one. This is not just the best episode that this series has done so far. It's the first truly, truly great episode that it has produced. And they have 3 episodes left. They might have one more in them. I don't know. I'm not sure how strong they intend to finish. But with 3 episodes left in the final season, they deliver the best episode they've ever done. And it is an absolute standout, remarkable episode. One of the best episodes of any Superman show I've ever seen. One of the best Superman stories of any kind in any format that I've seen for a few years at least. And it has such a wonderful message that you can take in different ways, because it shows that Clark makes this major life-changing decision. There's this thing that he's been doing his whole life that up until now he's thought of as a good thing, or at least as a necessary thing that makes his life better, even though he might not always enjoy it, and even though it definitely, forces him to pay a cost. But then he realizes that it will not help him to keep doing it. And he takes this thing that he's been doing his entire life that is an inextricable part of who he is. And he's brave enough to change it. He's brave enough to change it in front of the whole world, to go on TV and say, I'm Clark Kent, and I'm really Superman, and I have been the whole time. It's never too late to make a massive change in your life for the better. And that's one way to interpret it. The other way to interpret it is, this is the best episode this show has ever done. This is a blow-away, masterpiece, fantastic episode of television that this show just made in its final season with 3 episodes to go, which demonstrates that it's never too late. As long as you have some episodes left in your pocket, it's never too late for a good show that clearly had greatness within it somewhere to finally break through and live up to that potential.